Alright, hello everybody. My name is Sydney Clark. I currently attend Ripon College as a biology major. I'm a senior graduating this December, and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, so being able to do any sort of field work during the summer was a very new and exciting experience for me. So the purpose of this experiment was to determine whether skylight boxes are an effective non-lethal management technique, especially regarding the usurpation or aggressive removal of house sparrows to those native species. There we go. Okay. So last year, Kira Stark did an experiment similar, working with opaque roof nest boxes as well as skylight roof nest boxes. And what she found from that is that all species do have the same preference. And given that that preference was towards the opaque roof boxes, we wanted to continue working with that this summer and determine if species would continue to avoid the skylight boxes, even if they're the only option. So our hypothesis is that skylight boxes will deter house sparrows, and our prediction was that the occupancy of house sparrows in the opaque roof boxes during the 2022 breeding season would be greater than the house sparrow occupancy in the skylight roof boxes during the 2023 breeding season. So for this experiment, we closed off or removed all opaque boxes, and we were only working with skylight boxes, so we were left with 85 boxes, 79 of which were in the same location as last year. And we had 26 volunteers also participating in this weekly monitoring, and for each weekly check, the participants would log into a Google form the current occupancy of their specific nest box, so I was able to properly analyze all of the data collected. These boxes span throughout 19 different counties, and a successful nest occupant meant that the species in the nest box had to lay eggs. Monitoring occurred April 10th through August 7th, and boxes were just checked weekly, and yeah. For the data analysis, I used a chi-square goodness of fit test to determine if these species were still continuing to avoid the skylight boxes. The results from the 2022 experiment estimated the expected frequency of those species in the skylight boxes when the skylight boxes are the only option. So the results, there are two graphs to show the results. The first graph to the left should look a little familiar to the volunteers out there because I started working on this towards the end of summer, but as I was updating it, I was trying to send you guys those updates as well, just to keep everyone up to date. And this graph really just shows that native species did occupy those skylight boxes at a higher frequency than the house sparrows. And as you see, this red line right here is unoccupied boxes. And at the beginning of the summer, we had a lot of those unoccupied boxes. And this purple line right here is tree swallows. So as the breeding season progressed, we really see that tree swallows did not have an issue utilizing these skylight boxes. The next graph shows that skylight nest boxes were occupied significantly less by house sparrows, but more by native species than expected. So the expected is this black bar right here, and we expected those house sparrows to be occupying the skylight boxes at a much higher frequency than they were, which in turn is a good thing because they really did not occupy these boxes at all. So the results from the 2023 experiment support that skylight boxes do deter house sparrows, and this is because the house sparrows were consistently occupying these skylight boxes at a very low frequency. And another thing that these results show is that native species tolerate these skylight boxes a lot more than house sparrows, given that the native species were consistently occupying the skylight boxes more than house sparrows. So for future studies that could continue to provide information on if skylight boxes really are an effective non-lethal management technique is by determining if skylight boxes do reduce the direct competition between native species and house sparrows. I would like to acknowledge the Bluebird Restoration Association, Avery Stonewall, as well as the Ripon College Biology Department. I received so much support and guidance throughout this whole experiment, and I'm just so grateful that I got to take place in it. I would like to thank the volunteers again. I really did enjoy getting to know you guys and sending you guys those weekly roundups, and the comments that you guys were leaving. I felt like I continued to learn from that as well. So thank you, and I'm just really grateful that I got to contribute to this experiment the way that I did. So thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions. I saw you first.
So we did not participate in your study, but I have a question.
Mhm.
We had a property that we put 4 houses on, and they all ended up with sparrows. The one bluebird activity that spot had was actually a fence post that they had created for bluebird. So are you suggesting by your study that if there was a skylight on those 4 boxes, the possibility that the sparrows would not inhabit those 4?
Based on the results that we have gotten last year and this year, I would say yes. With all of the skylight boxes we had, it was mainly native species in there. There was very few times that I ever had any sort of house sparrows like actively nesting in there. I'm sure the volunteers had more than I did, but personally I had almost no house sparrows nesting in there.
How large was the hole on the top row?
About 2 inches.
Yeah, I think it was about 2 inches. 2 inches to 1.5 inches.
I wanted to add that the placement of those original, can you hear me? There you go. The placement of the original boxes in 2021, the monitors chose sites that had house sparrow issues for years, right? So we chose, the original locations were house sparrow problem areas. Just wanted to add that. So yes, we would recommend that you try out the Skylight box.
Okay. So how large was the hole, like the bluebird recommendation?
Yes.
For the front? Okay.
Yep.
Do you have differentiation in the native species between tree swallows and bluebirds? How many of what percentage of the native species were bluebirds versus tree swallows, because they seem to predominate?
Right, so this graph does just show all of the species. The bluebird occupancy is that dark blue line right here. I don't know if you guys can see it. So they still occupied at a relatively high frequency compared to the house sparrows, and that's really what we were looking at, was native species compared to the problem, which was house sparrows, not really each individual native species compared to each other, because they all get along, there is no problems. It's just figuring out if we can have an effective non-lethal management technique.
Could you please repeat the questions that people asked?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Our experience is that the bluebirds, the density is an issue, so the proximity of individual birdhouses, we've got 4 on our property, 2 acres, usually only 1 is active.
Yep.
Was that taken into consideration that the species have varying kind of areas of dominance that they like to have?
To an extent, I mean, we, like, going into this, well, okay, so the question was, is the proximity of current boxes taken into consideration when there are specific species that dominate in that area? Is that what you're asking? Okay, so we did have boxes. They were all relatively spaced apart. There was none that were so close that we were having issues with different species, but as the summer continued, we did have boxes that would have multiple broods of like tree swallows. So there were tree swallows that dominated one area for those skylight boxes, but there were a lot of skylight boxes where we would have a tree swallow nesting in there, and then later we'd have a bluebird nesting in that same location. There was, so what we did too is a successful occupant. If there was 3 broods of tree swallows in one nest box, we only counted it as one occupant, just to avoid all of that, because we couldn't confirm whether, especially tree swallows, because we don't ban those, so we can't confirm or deny whether they have the same parents or not.
I only have one brood, so I think what you're saying is re-nesting. Just
Right,
just
re-nesting.
clarifying. Yeah, you all know that tree swallows usually only have one brood per season, but I had 14 of these, we had 14, skylight boxes, and generally what we see is tree swallows come in, they finish their brood, and then, we get a late eastern bluebird nesting, and we did have that happen in a few of our skylight boxes.
Oh, yep.
What is your thinking as to why native species would prefer skylight box and sparrows would not?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
What is your thinking regarding the reasons why native species would prefer skylight boxes and sparrows would not?
In my opinion, after like visibly seeing those house sparrow nests, they pretty much take up the entire box, and they're almost like inside of the nest. So the way I see it is they just really do prefer that like dark enclosure, that like dark area, almost like compact. But the light coming in probably just makes them feel like exposed and open. And I just, after the native species normally have those, only cover the four corners, and they have a good little indent in there, but they're not like entirely submerged in there. So I'm just assuming that the house sparrows like the closed off dark nest boxes where native species don't really have a preference.
I just wanna add, native species, no bird likes the skylight box. None of them like it. I would almost think of it as house sparrows, like another explanation could be that house sparrows have a lot of other nesting opportunities available to them. They'll nest in the target. Have you ever seen them? You go to the mall and you'll see like there's a house sparrow nest in the Target sign, right? They're not that picky, right? So if they don't like a skylight box, they may be able to find something that's okay for them. But if a skylight box is the only thing that's available for a tree swallow, they can only nest they will only nest in that kind of cavity. So they don't like it, but if it's the only thing available, well, they're making the decision of not breeding versus breeding. They're always gonna choose the option to breed, even if it's in what they would consider a substandard box, right? So one of the next questions that you can ask is, are they producing as many young in a skylight box, which they clearly don't like from last year, as if they had an opaque box, right? So we could be keeping, and we might say, any extra any extra tree swallow or any extra bluebird is worth it, right? Because we're sort of changing the calculus in their competition with house sparrows. But there's no preference here. They don't want skylight boxes. We're just proposing some way to change the calculus in that competition between house sparrows and natives. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah.
You were in the middle right there.
We changed most of our boxes to skylight, and we ended up covering them up because we found that the sparrows would just build a big round nest, and they were in it as much as the others. And then we had 2 chickadees in the skylight box, and they both had eggs, which they deserted. So I wondered if that affected them.
Yeah. Yeah, you in the back.
Several years ago, the K-block was introduced. K-block was, the entrance hole was placed right under the roof to deter sparrows for what you said, building a high nest. Has any more study been done on that? I've had pretty good success with taking a box where there's been a sparrow in a conventional entry, putting a K-box there. The sparrow does not build a nest in it. Has anybody else experienced anything like that with the K-box?
Yeah, last 12 years I've been playing around with all kinds of boxes, and K-box has been one, and I found the house sparrow just one of them. So I completely agree with
Yeah, you were Yeah, that doesn't surprise me for a house. Yeah. Yeah, you're right there. Off center? Oh, yeah, of the skylight? Yeah, the skylight is centered with the box, and it's about, like, what do you say, like 1.5 to 2 inches? And then there's just a plexiglass, square that goes right on top of it to let the sunlight come in. Yep.
Are those boxes in the direct sunlight? Is there any concern about excessive heat?
So she asked if the skylight boxes, since they are letting in that sunlight, if there's a problem concerning excessive heat, especially for like the nestlings, I'm assuming. I did not have any problems or really any concerns with the excessive heat. I would go out when it was pretty hot. The only problems that I began to get concerned with was when it rained. Because then when it rains, those nest boxes, the parents won't necessarily come back and it's cold. So the cold, I feel like, outweighs the heat. I think the birds might be able to tolerate the heat a little bit better. And every time I would go in there to check the temperature of the eggs, I never noticed anything off or like too hot about that. And even like just like the temperature of the nest box itself, I never noticed it was too hot.
I just want to add, so the skylight boxes that we used in this experiment were all identical. And they had quite a bit of space at the top, so they had vents. So I would say we didn't have a problem with overheating because of the design with those big vents. If you put it in a box that is really tight, I might be concerned about that.